Hello, nations! We'd like to introduce you to Claire Mcfarlane, recent guest speaker at our school. For those of you not aware, Claire is an incredible athlete, courageous activist, a survivor of sexual violence, and the founder of her own project expedition, Footsteps to Inspire. She was born and raised in Johannesburg, and she is also Australian. Her story has inspired multiple people to break their silence and share their experiences. Through sport, Claire has found a way to make the issue of rape more comfortable to talk about. Claire, could you share a little bit about your story and your survival?
Yeah, thanks, Lulu, and great to be here with all of you today. So just very briefly, for those of you who didn't hear the talk earlier on in the year, I'm a rape survivor and also a attempted murder survivor. It happened to me when I was pretty young. I was 21 years old. I'd been living in Paris. I'd gone across to Paris kind of on an adventure when I was 19. And also then began to study at the Fine Arts School in Paris. But because I was also a self-funding student, I had to work at nighttime. And unfortunately, one night, walking to get a taxi, a man grabbed me, very violently attacked me and tried to murder me. And he also raped me. It was a really difficult experience, not just the attack, but everything that happened afterwards. Rape's not handled really that well in most countries of the world, but at Paris in that time, it was in 1999, so quite a while ago. They didn't catch him, and so I kind of moved on with my life. I didn't stay in Paris because I was really scared and afraid, and I'd have to still work at nighttime if I wanted to keep studying. So I just went back to Australia, where I'd been living before, and kind of just sort of try to restart my life again. I did what a lot of survivors do, which is go into the denial process. I never denied rape, but I denied that it had affected me in my life or impacted me in any way. And then that all changed radically 10 years later. So like in 2009, about 2 weeks before the actual, I guess you'd call it the anniversary of the rape, I got a call from the French police and they'd caught the man. There'd been a DNA match. And I was living in Europe, so I could actually get to Paris and do a lineup. And then that was another whole difficult process. Justice in France is very different to where I come from. So rape in France is not a crime against the state. So that means that the victim has to prosecute or they let the perpetrator walk free. So I put all of my life savings into this, and it lasted 6 years, the justice process. First criminal, and then it went into an appeal. He was sentenced, but he was released really early on. He didn't do the full term of his sentence. And that's kind of when I realized that I needed to do something. And so I began to speak out about what had happened to me. I'd healed, which was really important. I don't think you can speak out unless you are sort of on the road to recovery, because it's really challenging. But that was amazing. That really inspired a lot of other survivors, victims, to reach out to me from around the world and share their stories, most of them for the first time. And I began to realize and see that sexual violence was affecting everybody. Like, it was affecting women, it was affecting men. I was getting a lot of stories from children as well. And a lot of these people had never told anyone before. It was like their very first time. And I kind of deep down realized I needed to do something. I needed to take my story and somehow create some change. And I'd used running as a tool, one of my tools of healing, to get through that really difficult 6 years of the justice process, because it's really where I hit rock bottom myself. And so running was one of these tools. And I realized that sport was this really good way to maybe talk about this difficult issue of sexual violence, because it's an uncomfortable topic and it's not something you can like just sort of say, let's sit down and talk about rape. I mean, it's just not like that. So that's why I chose to use sport and running particularly. And I really needed to make it a big mission, a big challenge, take it to the world. And so I'm running 16 kilometers of beach in every single country of the world, with this goal of raising awareness and finding solutions to peacefully end sexual violence. So the journey has taken me to 55 countries already. There's a lot more to go, 175. And I'm in Africa at the moment. I'm going to try and run in 8 countries in Africa before October this year. And now what I do is I don't just run alone. I do speak out a lot. So I'm engaging in every country with governments, with organizations, with services, with justice departments, with survivors, with young people. I talk a lot to young people at schools, even children, to learn and understand what's going on in the world around sexual violence, and then also to find good practices out there, see what's happening, and then I invite people to run with me. And what I'm realizing is that I never run alone, like I very rarely run alone, and I'm seeing that people want to talk about sexual violence. They just don't know how. And so through Footsteps to Inspire and through the running, I'm creating a safe space for conversation and understanding. And so that's what brings me to being here with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. So you mentioned that you had healed. So how are you getting past this experience, and what services and resources and people have helped you in your healing? Is there anyone who affected you the most in helping you through this experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I guess when it comes to surviving sexual violence or rape, there's no like one standard practice fits all. And also trauma can come at a different time. Like if you see, when you look at my story, it took me 10 years to actually face what had happened to me and recognize that it had impacted my life, and pretty dramatically. Like when I look at those choices I made in those last 10 years, I'd lost a lot of respect for myself. I sometimes even put myself into situations that were dangerous, which could hurt me. I was very lucky they didn't, but and so the healing was really, really, I just realized healing was actually, I didn't have a choice. I had to heal if I wanted to move forward. But what's really tricky with sexual violence and rape, and it depends on the country we live in. So for example, like in Switzerland, and that's where I was living at the time when they caught the man, there's no social medical system. You have to have private medical cover. And so rape is seen as a pre-existing condition. And so private medical won't pay for any of the psychological support or costs associated. So I actually had to go and find other ways to heal, because I was spending all my money on the legal process. And so I I started reading books. There's a lot of amazing, like, sort of self-help books out there. I was also living through quite a lot of compounded trauma. So that's when one traumatic event can bring up other trauma from our life. And I'd had quite a difficult childhood. I'd seen a lot of domestic violence. And so some of the reading I was doing was helping me with that, because my father was an alcoholic. And so there were some really great books. And one of the books actually saved my life, which is called Codependent No More by an author called Melody Beattie. And that sort of led me on this path of like finding the next book. But I didn't just do the reading. I knew I had to do some other stuff on the other side. And so I took up the running. Running was really important because it's really hard. And anyone who's listening to this who is a survivor might understand is that you kind of want to pretend that you're okay, like on the outside, and people expect that from you. They expect you to be functioning like in life. But the thing is, everything on the inside is like breaking apart. And so it's really hard to find a balance. And so I found like the sport, running. I took up CrossFit as well. That got me feeling very strong. So those kind of things helped me feel really good in my body. And so that helped sort of balance everything out. I also took up quite a lot of holistic healing, so yoga and meditation. I really changed the way I ate as well. So there was kind of like this sort of 360 holistic approach, which is really important. And I also occasionally did some counseling when it was really dark, like when I felt like I needed to talk to another person. I reached out to a few services that work with survivors of sexual violence. I did it anonymously. So I didn't there's a lot of services that you can actually call on the phone or chat with them, and you don't have to disclose your identity. And that felt really good at times. So it was a real mix of healing. And then in terms of a person standing out in all of that, I actually have to say, I think it was myself. Sounds a bit weird, I know, but I realized like my healing process was also a lot to do with my relationship with myself and how I saw myself in the world, and particularly about feeling empowered. I know we talk about that a lot, but it's actually a really real thing that when you feel good with yourself, like everything else sort of starts to figure itself out, and what people think or say about you doesn't matter anymore. And so because sexual violence gets so much judgment and blame from others, that I felt was really important. So I think getting good with myself was like critical in that healing process.
Thank you.
Hope that.
What do you think are the first steps to ending sexual violence?
Yeah, it's okay. I think the most simplest way to answer that is what we're doing today, talking about it. I think that is one of the first things we can absolutely do. There's so much silence and taboo around sexual violence, and I guess we use the word rape culture a lot. That plays into that. So there's kind of this like society view on what sexual violence means, which normally entails blaming the victim a lot. And we don't understand also the other side of it. So, so this might seem a bit counterintuitive, but it's what I do with my approach, is not just hearing stories from survivors, but also even trying to understand perspectives from perpetrators. Because if we understand it, that's when we can actually start finding solutions. And I guess the more we talk about it and the more we're open about our experiences, the more that the people around us will change the way they think about it. And changing the way we think about it, talk about it, is absolutely the first way to ending it.
Thank you. That was quite a difficult question to answer, but I know that lots of young women, but also men and people of all genders, feel unsafe when walking down the street, especially at night. And I was wondering if you had any ideas about precautions that people could take in order to protect themselves from sexual violence, maybe going out at a certain time or using certain streets or carrying pepper spray. I don't know. Would you have any advice?
Yeah, look, I guess that one I want to answer it in two ways, because you would be aware of what recently happened in the UK with the young woman that was actually murdered on her way home. I think in Switzerland that came up as well. And so there's been a lot of, I guess, women's movements as well, particularly saying that women should have the right to feel safe on the street, and totally understand that. But it's true, we don't live in a world where that's our reality right now. And so we do need to actually take steps to help ourselves stay safe. But the other side of it as well is that things like sexual violence and rape, I know what happened to me was by what seemed to be a stranger. And I guess it's our biggest fear is what I call stranger danger. But sexual violence is perpetrated the most by people we know. So statistically speaking, they've put a number behind it, and they say 75% of cases of rape and sexual violence is someone close to us. So like a friend, a boyfriend, teachers at school, coaches, just people within our lives. So that is a different kind of safety precaution. So I'm going to answer it in two ways. I think when it comes out to going out on the street, gosh, it's so hard. Like I was walking to a taxi, right? I was doing everything that you're meant to do to stay safe. And the man that attacked me, he was like armed. So he had like a knife, he had a gun, and he had a can of mace. So he had pepper spray in his hand that he used to like hit me harder, right? So the irony of it all. But I'd say it's just being very aware of your environment. So know where you're going. Like if you are going to go out at nighttime, that's totally fine. But if it's an unfamiliar environment, then become familiar with it. So, and if it's an environment that you're really worried about, get someone to go with you. I think that's from what I've learned from my experience, is I wouldn't ever walk to a taxi on my own again. If I have the choice, I would ask someone to walk with me. I'd use Uber or a service like that where they come to my door now. The other thing as well, which is really empowering, is doing some form of self-defense. They are really good courses. There's a lot available now online. I can share some links afterwards as well if you want to add it onto this. Because self-defense teaches you, it teaches you all of the steps that you need before you actually have to use physical violence. So, it teaches you how to identify dangerous situations. So to give a couple of little examples, like if you feel like someone is trailing behind you, the best thing to do is actually step to the side, put your arms up to protect yourself. It's called like the thinking position. So you're protecting yourself and you almost look at the person. Or you can go and cross the street and do the same action. So you kind of, it seems a bit strange, but you're confronting the situation, understanding what's going on. The same like when you go into a lift. I mean, I don't like to go into a lift and stand at the back of it because I feel like I could be cornered. So I always stand in an elevator, in a lift, like facing inwards and as close to the doors as possible. So I have an exit route and I can see what someone behind me might do. So self-defense teaches a lot of that. So I think that's one of the best things. When it comes to then staying safe in situations with someone we know, that can be a lot harder. I think, first of all, when we will probably talk about this, but conversations around consent and understanding each other's perspectives about how we see sex and sexual interactions with each other is really important. Like that can be one way of avoiding a situation because you've openly talked about what you want to do and not do, which is really important. The other one is if you're like at a party and maybe you've been drinking, I guess that one would be, is really listen to your instinct. If you're feeling like you're in a situation where you might be unsafe, talk to your friends, like leave. It doesn't matter if you leave. Like there'll be more parties and there'll be more opportunities to have a good time. But if you're worried that someone's like cornering you or trying something with you, just exit the situation. That really. And then if you're in a situation at someone's home, like say you went over to watch a movie with a friend and you could sense that it was going to become more than just watching a movie, but you didn't want to do anything, leave. Leave the situation. And if they start actually threatening you or making you feel embarrassed or teasing you or even threatening to intimidate you in some way, still leave. I know that can seem hard to do at the time because we are worried about what people think about us, but ultimately your safety is the most important. So I hope that gives a few suggestions. We could probably talk about this for hours.
Yeah, thank you. But leading off from that, so pretty related to this, what do you think is the most important thing you would tell young women and young men who are beginning to explore the world of sex? So this would be more to do with people you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I want to say is that it's totally normal. We're discovering our sexuality, and I guess even a lot of young people are watching porn as well, and so learning about sex in various different ways. So the thing that I can say the most, I guess, critical and even just the most important is being able to talk about it. And I know we don't get encouraged to do that a lot, but it can seem a bit embarrassing in the beginning. So I'm actually doing a workshop next week with the 12s and 13s, and I'm going to teach some techniques about how to do that, because I think the most important is figuring out what you want yourself. So that would be really critical. Like when you are exploring your own sexuality in any way that is, understanding what is important to you is going to help you have boundaries. because when someone steps across that and tries something you don't like, you know straight away to say stop. Or if you're curious about something but you're not sure, you can then also have that conversation with someone. But if you're relying on someone else to tell you what you should be exploring, then that's when things can get very blurred. And that's also when you can get hurt, because maybe there's something you don't want to do and that person's making you do it. So I think that would be my number one point, is like, start to think about it from your perspective first. Like, what does sex mean to you? Is it something you want to do now? Is it something you want to do later? And even down to little things like touch. Like, where do you want someone to touch you? Like, what's a good zone and what's a no-go zone on your body? Getting clear with that with yourself, that will really help you then have open conversations with someone else, and then also figure out if you're compatible with someone else. Because like, if someone else wants to do something or all things that you don't want to ever do, then you may never be able to actually have a sexual encounter with each other, because you just can't find even one thing that you want to do together. So I think that's, my number one piece of advice.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, what would be the best thing to do if you have experienced sexual violence, or what should you do if a friend or someone you know has experienced sexual violence but is not comfortable talking to anyone about it? How are you supposed to help them? I just put these two questions together because of the assumption that maybe they're similar, but maybe it isn't. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, totally. I understand, because I think sometimes with sexual violence, we might tell our friends, or our friends might have seen something. So I do think they kind of can go together for sure. I think the first thing, and the critical one, is to acknowledge that it wasn't your fault in any way whatsoever. No matter what anyone says, it wasn't your fault. Sexual violence, rape, none of it. If it is something that you have not consented to in any way and someone has made you do something, never your fault. And so that is really important, I think, in telling yourself, okay, if it's happened to you, and then if you are a friend, letting your friend know that as well. Like that will really, that's just really critical. The next thing is figuring out what you need. And I think that's the most important. A lot of people, when you're a survivor of sexual violence or a victim, I use the word interchangeably because not everyone sees themselves as a survivor yet, and some people are happy just to say victim. So, but sometimes it's there's a lot of people trying to tell you what to do because they all have a vision of what should be done. But the thing is, what's most important is what you feel like you want to do, and like, you may not be ready to get help, and that's okay. I guess that's the next thing that I'd say is just sort of number two is what do you need? If there's been like risk and exposure to, say, like STDs, like say you were raped and someone didn't use protection, like those are kinds of things you may want to take action on straight away. And you can do that. You probably can't do that completely anonymously, but there are services that can help you. So, for example, in Geneva, there's two services. There's LAVI, LAVI. They coordinate responses to all kinds of crime, but they have a lot of links with the hospitals and doctors, so they know the right people to send you to. And then there's also Viol Secours. And so worth calling them first and finding out where is the best medical service to go to, and then going and having medical care if you need that. So if you if you weren't protected, there's the risk of pregnancy as well. So generally what they'll do is they'll make sure that you haven't been exposed to any STDs. You get put on the morning after pill normally to prevent, if you're a girl or woman, to prevent pregnancy. And then if you're a guy, STDs, of course, and then they'll make an assessment if you need to go on what's called PEP, which is the prophylactics. It's the medication if you've been exposed to HIV. So that's really important as well. And then generally they'll then normally talk about whether or not you want to report, and then they may do a rape kit as well. But reporting is not mandatory if you're over the age of consent. If you are a child, it is absolutely mandatory to report, and it's a slightly different process. But if you are classified as legally able to consent in Switzerland, it's your choice. So I would recommend that if you feel like that you need to just take care of your body and your well-being. But then after what you do is up to you. That's really, really critical. I think services like Vieux Secours are really great. They have an actual support group for teens, for younger people as well, in multiple languages. And so knowing that you're not alone with regards to this is, I think, can be very helpful. Sometimes when this happens, you feel like you're the only person it's happened to, and the people around you don't understand. And so it's hard to find even your friends. I mean, your friends might be really good meaning, but they may not understand. And so I do suggest reaching out to support groups and even anonymous chats. So Vieux Secours does do chats, like you can call and have a chat with them. For guys, there's an organization in the US, but anyone in the world can actually reach out to them. It's called 1 in 6. So the number 1 in and the number 6.org. So they're great for guys because this is happening to boys and men as well. It's 1 in 6, actually. That's why it's called 1 in 6. And then for friends. Okay, so this is tricky. This is really tricky because you can be a friend that someone has confided in you, or you can be a friend that is worried that something has happened. So what do you do? I think, as I said, the first thing is just let your friend know that you believe them, and just be there and just let them know you're there to listen if they want to talk about it. I don't think you can force them to do anything that they don't want to do. It's really about listening to what they need. If they don't know, and this is something else, like your friend might go, I don't know what I need right now. You can actually ask them and say, hey, are you okay if I go away and research and find out what support is out there and get their consent to do that and see what they say. If they say, no, I just don't want to talk about it, you actually have to respect that. But if they go, yeah, that would be good, then go away and research and see what's out there and then come back to them and go, hey, I found some information, and share it with them. Because a lot of the time, victims and survivors don't know. We don't know what's out there for us. And so, and having a friend that's gone and helped find some information is awesome. And then I guess it's just always letting your friend know that you're there if they need to reach out. The other thing as well is that you're not a counselor. So don't feel like it's your responsibility to fix your friend and make it better, because maybe you can't. And if you've not had training to do that, it can also be very traumatic for you. So, recognize that you too have boundaries and you can only do what you can do to help your friend. But afterwards, it's up to them to then take their own journey in the process of healing or reporting or going further. I hope that answered the question for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So now moving away from friends, who can you turn to for advice when no one in your family believes you, and especially when it's a member of your family who is being sexually violent with you? Who would you turn to in that situation?
Yes, so this is tricky. I guess also with regards to, say, everyone at the school, everyone comes from different cultural backgrounds as well, because of it. And so your family can have a lot of different perspectives and beliefs on sexual violence. So even if it happens to you, not even in the home, but outside of the home, you actually might be afraid to tell your family because of what that means culturally or so I'm going to answer this in two ways. One being, if it's happened outside of your home, that one would then, and you want to do something about it, I would definitely say reach out to the services available where you are. So I know that school has a really good process. The international school has a policy on sexual violence, and the teachers that are responsible for that are trained. So if you feel comfortable reaching out to school, do. They are there to protect you, and they will. I've had a read through it, so I know that they will. But if you don't feel comfortable keeping it in school, which can be understandable as well, definitely reach out to these different organizations. They are, if you are not a minor, so if you're over the age of consent, you can stay anonymous. It is different if you are considered still a child, because it is mandatory reporting, but they are meant to tell you that. So they are meant to let you know that they can't necessarily keep certain information private and give you the choice of whether you continue or not. So definitely Geneva, Viol Secours, absolutely, I highly recommend them. They're really good. And then again, if you need just someone to chat to as well, then if it's in your home, right? And so this is really hard if someone in your home is hurting you. And a really important question to ask, because sexual violence or child sexual abuse is really high in the world. It's between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5. So a lot of people we know are being affected by this. First of all, I would say is try and figure out how you can get to be safe. So if you can't tell someone in your home, I'd really recommend telling someone at school, maybe a teacher that you trust. I know you have the school psychologist. They may not be able to, they may have to report depending on your age, but I do think you need an adult to help you, guide you into the right steps of staying safe, because you don't want this to keep happening. The other thing is you can also reach out to an organization. So the same thing, Viol Secours, they would also be able to help with regards to this. La Vie as well, and guide you in the right direction when it's related to family. And then if you're not feeling ready yet to say something, try, and you have somewhere where you can keep a journal that is private. I think it would be really important is to start writing down what is happening to you. Now, I say this because it comes up a lot when it's also domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Often you can't, it's harder to prove in a family environment. And so if you're keeping a record of what is happening to you, that can actually be used as evidence and proof that something has happened later down the track. So if you feel like you can do that safely, then definitely do that as well.
Thank you. Relating more to how to approach a friend who has experienced sexual violence, why don't some victims or survivors come forward? Why do some people prefer to be more quiet about what has happened, and how do we sort of understand that and react better to that?
Yeah, that is a really great question, and I guess from what I've seen in the world, I've been to 55 countries. I've spoken to so many different survivors. Many will tell me and never tell anyone ever again. So there's a lot of victims and survivors that just never want to tell anybody. I think the number one thing is shame. There's a lot of shame and fear around sexual violence because of how it is portrayed in the world that we live in. So unfortunately, we do live in a world that has a tendency to blame the victim, like straight away. And even know from my own experience, I don't like to ever highlight exactly what had happened to me as a reason why, but I was beaten almost to death. I'd almost lost my life. I was like totally just destroyed. And the doctors in the hospital, the first thing they said to me was, what did I do to cause it? So they blamed me like straight away in their discourse. And that's the first people you expect to help you and make you feel like it wasn't your fault. So that when you've been sexually abused, someone has really messed around with your personal power. It's like, I guess it's sort of almost our ultimate expression of who we are is our sexuality. And when someone takes that away from us without our permission, that can really destabilize us and we can feel very, very vulnerable. Because it's almost like the ultimate way of hurting somebody. So when you're in that place and you're feeling so vulnerable, it's very hard to then, like, I guess, trust. It's very hard to trust the people around you, or you know, feel reassured that people are going to actually support you and not feel like it's your fault. So there's a lot of fear around that, of that blaming, and then the shame. Also, culturally speaking, so depending on where you've been brought up or the family that you grow up in, you know, some cultures blame, for example, like for young women and girls, if they lose their virginity, they have like dishonored their family. So if you can think about that kind of burden is just huge. So the fear of speaking out is terrifying. I think what we're doing today is really important because I think, and you've probably noticed I've said this a lot, is that you can, I don't think enough victims and survivors know that they can speak out anonymously. And so that's really, really critical, because if you can hide your identity, it still means that you can actually get help in the situation where your family sees what has happened to you as dishonoring the family. For example, when it comes to our friends, it's tricky because I guess we've all grown up in different families, different environments. So how we see this with regards to our friends can be very, very different. And so, again, it can be quite tricky then to help our friends or even ask them to talk about it. I guess the first thing, and again, I say this again, is to just reassure the people around you that it's not their fault and that you believe them, and that you're just going to listen without judgment. I think that's absolutely critical, is if someone knows that you're a safe space or a safe person, who's not going to try and maybe tell you what to do or give you solutions, just listen. That can be really an environment that you can make your friend feel safe in, and then they might open up. But again, you have to let them decide what they want to do with it. They may not want to tell anyone else again. It can be really tricky if you're worried about, like, say you're in a group of friends and you're worried one of those people in that group is maybe what we would call a predator. So they're say taking advantage of parties where there's a lot of alcohol, and they're actually going around and having non-consensual sex with lots of people in your group. And you're worried about everyone's safety, like that can be quite hard, like, because you don't want to force your friends to speak out if they don't want to, but you also want to let someone know in case something has happened. And so that's when I think that you've got to sort of make a decision for yourself. If you feel unsafe, then go to an adult and ask for advice. I would probably go to the school, let them know if it's a school context. If it's not a school context, reach out to an organization, because organizations are really trained well in this, and they trained well in the context of where you're living. So they normally know who are the right people to contact and be made aware of what is going on. I hope that answers the question. There's so much to talk about it in that context. There's a really great page on Instagram called Why I Didn't Tell. I can get you the exact handle to share. That's a lot of stories from survivors about why they didn't speak out. And when you see that, you really understand, like, all the different reasons, and it really helps sort of, but a lot of it really does come down to the world we live in and how they view survivors at the moment.
Thank you. You mentioned consent a couple of times. I just wanted to go a little deeper into that, and I want to ask you, what are your views on the sexist take when it comes to consent, and as like when a man is sexually assaulted is not taken as seriously even in today's world and age. And so why is their consent overlooked, and how do we as a generation amplify their validity?
Yeah, it's a really, I love these questions. They're quite complex to answer. I guess, first of all, consent. Like, how do you even describe consent? I guess consent is, because some people assume that if there's an absence of no, so if someone hasn't said no, there's been consent, right? But that's not necessarily the case. Just because you haven't said no doesn't mean you've said yes. And we live in a world and a society that tends to really focus on that absence of consent, that absence of a no, as being consent. So like if you've been drinking, now in a lot of countries now, like drinking alcohol is seen as not being able to give consent. So if you went to hospital and had to have a medical procedure under the influence of alcohol, they will wait because you have to be able to consent to that medical procedure. So the same applies when it comes to acts of, sexual acts of any kind. But there's a very blurred line around that. The same, I guess, with regards to what is seen as masculinity in the world that we live in. A lot of men that have shared their stories with me, many were sexually abused by their school teachers. And I say this because they were boys. They were like 11, maybe 12. And it was their female teachers who in their 20s. And so this is seen as like in many countries is something that's cool. Is like your female teacher wanted to have sex with you. But that's, and so there's like a sort of almost a positive masculinity put into that scenario, regardless of whether that boy wanted it or not. Because most of the stories I hear is that many of these men that had that happen to them as boys, they were angry with their bodies because their bodies had betrayed them. Because when you're just coming into puberty, you can't control what's going on with your body at all. And so, that's sort of like this imbalance of power. And I guess that's what sexual violence is, or assault is, this abuse of power and these power dynamics. So it's really, until we can start changing our conversations around, I guess, masculinity, and we talk more openly about this, so we make it safer for men to share their stories, just in answering your question about men particularly, because so many men are afraid to speak out because they're not seen as men, or they're not masculine enough, or they should be grateful that that kind of thing happened to them. Also in the LGBT community, so like a lot of, I guess there's a sort of, with regards, I get a lot of men that are homosexual that have experienced things that have happened to them, but they've been silenced because it's kind of like what we do in our community, right? So until we can start to speak out more and more about this, and hear it from the perspective of the victim, of the survivor, so hear how it has impacted their life. It is going to be quite hard for us to change this and change that, imbalance that we have around different things of consent. Even modern media. I don't know if Bridgerton has been very big amongst the Netflix. So there was a scene where, the woman actually forced her new husband to have sex with her. And I mean, that is totally non-consensual. And there was a lot of it brought up a lot of questions around that. But it's, I guess it's almost glamorized in a way. So it's very, very tricky. And I think what we're doing now, having conversations about it, talking about it more in a very non-judgmental space, because it's important to also listen to the other side, even if it makes us angry. It can be frustrating. I've been doing a lot of research recently, and I came across there's this guy that I'm not going to mention his name because I don't actually support what he does, but I think what he's doing is important to look at because he gets a lot of support. But he's a guy going around busting a lot of myths around, well, what he would call myths around sexual violence. It's really weird because he sort of is looking at like he criticizes things like rape culture and says it doesn't exist. And he then goes out and tries to prove that. And he gets a lot of his videos get like 13 million to up to 20 million views. So there's a lot of people supporting what he does. So it's really important for us to understand that side, even if it makes us uncomfortable, because if we need to figure out ways of creating change, we need to know who is believing what in the world that we live in and the world that we navigate in. So the other thing around consent, I think, is as young people, I think is being able to have dialogues together, and I don't even want to just say as like young men and young women, because you all might identify very differently. Your sexual orientation and identification may be very different. So I guess it's just as a group of humans, if we can come together and share our experiences and how we view, so that we can create more empathy. So I guess, understand what it feels like from someone else's perspective. That can also really help and go a long way in creating respectful relationships. And that also can help a lot when it comes to things like consent, because we learn to listen to each other. And so when someone says they don't want to do something, we respect that. We don't force them then to do it. Does that answer some of the questions? Did you want to ask me any more questions about that? You want to dive any deeper?
Yeah, thank you so much. So now, kind of linking more to the law and how consent works, does the victim, you mentioned that the word no, so does the victim have to say the words no in terms of the law to count as rape, or is there another valid way that they accept non-consensual kind of acts?
Oh yeah, this question. This is the one that gets me really frustrated about the law, because it's different in every single country, right? Sadly, Europe is kind of a little behind on from what I've seen, and I feel like I can say this because I've been to 55 countries across most regions of the world. So I've seen a lot of different cultural perspectives and laws on sexual violence. Consent is very absent from the law. And in Switzerland, it's completely absent from the law. So that means that they don't even care if you've said no in Switzerland right now. You have to prove as the victim that you have been sexually violated in some way. And so you have to have physical bodily injury normally, of some kind of proof like that. It's only rape. Can we talk? Sorry, actually, I need to ask. Can we use words am I free to talk openly? We're not censored in this interview.
Yes, you can talk openly.
Okay, so right now what's problematic with the law in Switzerland is that rape is seen as only penetration by the penis into the vagina. So penetration into any other part of your body isn't rape. And if a man is penetrated, it's not rape either. Now, this is very problematic because in almost every other country of the world, that is rape. And in some countries of the world, it even goes further than that, because rape is seen as any kind of, well, as soon as there's non-consensual forcing of a sexual act onto someone of any kind, it falls under the rape laws. So it's very hard for me to answer you with regards to this question completely. Now, in Switzerland, there is a lot of work being done to get this changed, and I'm hoping that it will. There's been a really big movement happening in the last couple of years, and even some of the political parties are getting behind it. So because At the moment, there are 9 countries in Europe that have consent in their law. So what does that mean? That means there has to be a very clear yes. And if there wasn't a very clear yes, the perpetrator then has to prove that there was a yes. At the moment when there's no consent, it's all about the victim proving that they said no or they implied no in some way. And so it takes what we call the burden of proof away from the victim and puts it onto the perpetrator. So right now, only 9 countries in Europe have that in their law. So it's very tricky up in Europe. And it does make it hard for you and anyone listening to this, because it means that if you wanted to go and follow the justice process, if you actually wanted to go through and report to the police, you may not be able to because the law won't let you. But that doesn't stop you from going to get help. And I think that's really important. So all the organizations like here in Switzerland recognize the failing of the law. And so they will still help you and support you and give you recognition that something has happened. And it is different if you are a minor. So if you're under 16, that law is different. Actually, any sexual act with someone under the age of consent is sexual violence or child sexual abuse. Does that kind of answer the question for you?
Yes, just a quick sub-question. So does that include sexual acts amongst minors who are both minors?
Oh, yeah, these are good questions. And I actually have to say I can't answer that properly for you because it is very, very different in countries. And we would need to go away and research it, like go and ask, which would be really good to do for Switzerland. I think if you wanted to do something extra on the side of this is go away and find out where the law stands. To my knowledge, it's pretty poor in Europe. I've had a lot of young survivors write to me from different European countries, quite a few in Finland, actually, and asking me what they can do because they were sexually assaulted or raped by someone the same age as them, and they were under 16 years old. And at the time, they couldn't do anything. So at the time of when it happened, there was no law to protect them. There was no case. They couldn't do anything. However, that doesn't stop you from going to get support. So there is an acknowledgement that this has happened. And I know that laws are always being updated. So for example, with Finland, what I know is that the law has changed now with regards to sexual violence perpetrated by minors on minors. And so a couple of these survivors can now, in retrospective, go through the justice process. But this is very dependent on countries. So laws are, so some countries will only let you report 1 year after, like you only have 1 year to report in. Other countries, it'll be a lifetime. In other countries, like for me, what happened to me in France, it was 10 years. It's called the statutory period of limitations. It's different if you're a minor and if you're an adult. That can also be very different. So again, as I said, I can't quite answer that question clearly or precisely because it is so different. But please don't let that stop you from getting help and reaching out. So because you are all at school and your school has a very good policy on sexual violence, there are ramifications. Even if the law can't necessarily support what has happened, the school will have a process to support you and also even have disciplinary processes in place as well. So it is important to still try and seek help rather than keeping it inside. Because keeping it inside, and I talk about this from my own personal experience, it really does eat away at you, and it really affects how you see yourself and the kinds of relationships you're going to have moving forward. When someone has hurt you like that, it's very hard to have healthy sexual relationships after that. So it is important.
Thank you so much. And that perfectly answered my next question, actually. So now you've run in 55 countries already, which is amazing. And it sounds like Europe doesn't have the best laws and services. So are there any countries with good practices that we can learn from and take kind of like, yeah.
Totally. And I think, thanks for asking this question, because I sometimes up in Europe, we don't always necessarily look at developing countries potentially as countries that have sort of better, maybe not better, but practices that have more evolved than what we have. And I think as young people, what's kind of cool is you have the potential to break that barrier. Like, and I'm more than happy to create links later on if you want as well, where you can talk with young people in other countries and start to make that shift, because I do believe that you are the ones that are going to be part of the change. And be the ones to help us find solutions to end this problem. So some of the good countries, I think I'm going to share 3 countries. The first one was Malaysia. And I do like to share this because it absolutely surprised me completely. I did not expect this in Malaysia. Malaysia is, in all senses, what we would call a Muslim state, 60% Muslim. That means that their particular viewpoint and culture is very focused around that. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but that culture does then infuse into things like sexual violence and how that is looked upon as a society. But they have a service. It's called a one-stop crisis center. So this is like a special unit in the hospital that is a safe space. So it's actually unmarked, it's unidentified, it's protected by security for any victims of sexual or domestic violence. And so what happens is when you go to the hospital and you tell the front desk, they straight away put a color code on your file so you don't have to say anything else afterwards. They'll take you to this room and you generally only have to share what has happened to you once or twice. And this is really important because if I was to explain about what happened to me in a hospital, the amount of trauma or extra trauma you can cause a victim in the hospital process can be pretty horrific, and making a victim have to say over and over what has happened to them, not having anywhere safe to be in the hospital as well. In many situations of like when the crime is perpetrated by someone you know, they actually might come after you to stop you from going to get medical help. So knowing you're safe is really important. And so they have this service in every single hospital in Malaysia, every single hospital, which is quite mind-blowing, because most countries in the world don't even have it in one. So this is pretty extraordinary. It's not perfect. I do know people have used it and not necessarily had the best experience, but it does exist and they are working on making it better. And so I think that's something that is exemplary. And the World Health Organization has actually made this as a recommendation for countries to implement around the world, that they have these services in the hospitals, these one-stop crisis centers. So great to see Malaysia doing that. And I think we could learn a lot from what they're doing. They do it cost effectively too. This isn't a rich country. They don't have a lot of money. And so, because I hear that a lot from countries, we can't afford to do this, but you can do it very cheaply as well. Now, on the side of the law, I'd like to share a country that I've been to, which just amazed me with regards to the law, and that was Namibia. Namibia is in Southern Africa, right next to South Africa. On the eastern coast, and they never used to have a very good law. It was okay, but it wasn't great. And then in the early 2000s, all the organizations working in the space of sexual violence began to work together and lobbied for the law to be changed. And they created what is called a Rape Act. So this is like a complex law that covers everything that's regarded to rape and sexual violence. And it is absolutely extraordinary. It covers pretty much all sexual acts against your will, or that have been forced on you, or even not even been forced on you, that have been what we call coerced. So say you've been blackmailed into, say someone says to you, oh, I'm not going to give you a promotion unless you sleep with me, or they refuse to give you a place to live. This can happen a lot in the LGBT community in countries where they're vulnerable. They rely on people's goodwill to give them places to live, and that can actually be like a coercive situation. Well, I'll give you a bed if you sleep with me. So the law covers all of that. And what's really great about this law as well is that it's actually illegal to be homosexual in Namibia, but this law protects you if you are. So, which is important, because for the LGBT community, where sexual violence can be happening a lot in different forms, if it's illegal, they can't actually go for help, because then they will be prosecuted for breaking the law. And so, yeah, so that's pretty amazing. And then the third country is South Africa, where I am right now. They're doing something. South Africa's sexual violence is a big problem here in South Africa. It's also very violent. So and it will happen to a woman more than once, generally, in her lifetime. And so there's a big movement for change here. People talk openly about it, very openly, actually talk about it in the media a lot. And the Rape Crisis Center organization has created a justice program, and they have been working with government, and they're going to be rolling out specialized sexual violence courts in every magistrate in the country. And why that is important is because when you go through the justice process, it's pretty horrific as a survivor. It's long. You feel often like the criminal. And so to have a specialized space where this is handled with you in mind and your safety and your protection is amazing. And it also means judges will be trained properly, so they will implement the law properly as well. And so there'll be harsher sentences for perpetrators. And then the idea is that there's these courts in every magistrate in the country. And so that means that everyone in the country will have access to justice, because in a lot of developing countries, that can be a problem. If you don't live in the city, you can't access justice. And so this is an amazing project. It's a 10-year project. And there's a lot of lobbying, but it's something that can be looked at, I think, around the world. I mean, I would have liked to have had a service like that when I was in France. You know, I'd gone through a specialized court, but I didn't. And so, yeah, so that's 3. I hope that inspires maybe and gets you thinking about what's going on elsewhere outside of Europe.
Yes, thank you so much. So lastly, coming back to how you healed from this experience, could you name maybe the most important thing that helped you change from being a victim to being a survivor? What would that be for you?
Yes. So the most important was, so for me, it didn't happen by choice, because they found my perpetrator 10 years later. And so I was forced into the justice process, which it was a choice. I didn't have to do it, but I didn't want him to walk free. So I didn't want regrets. So I knew that I must do this. And so that was being forced to talk about what had happened to me. And so I think I really don't want anyone who's listening to this today to think that they must feel forced to speak out. That's not what I mean. But the fact of speaking and sharing what has happened is, I find, really important. It makes you feel like you're not alone. If someone else, if you hear someone else's story, it doesn't mean you have to speak publicly. So I normally just say, just telling one person can maybe all you need. But to lift it off your shoulders, it's like this huge burden that you carry, and handing it to someone else for a little while is a good thing. So I think that would be the number one. I mean, that's what changed my life forever. And that's what got me to this point, to be able to sit here and talk with you so openly and freely, and to even look at what's happened at me, to be able to help others, would be definitely the telling somebody. Yeah. And then can I add an extra one, just because I think it's important? And I know I said it earlier on, but I think this is really important because I think as a woman in the world, and I actually even think for men, because it's I think this is a human thing, is learning to love yourself. Like really, truly loving yourself. It's not and this is not about a selfish thing. It's not about like standing in front of, well, you can stand in the front of the mirror and go, I love you, but it's not about your outward appearance. It's what's going on the inside. And when you are totally good with yourself, like when your inner dialogue is no longer one that is hurting you, it's one that's supporting you, then it changes everything that happens around you. And it really changes your relationship with people. And it does what we call, which is, it gives you your power back. You know, it makes you realize that you are in charge of your power. You're responsible for where it comes from, and that no one can take it away from you. You're allowed to give it. You can give it if you want to, but no one can take it away. And when you're really good with yourself, it becomes very easy to do that. And you can do it in a very kind way. It's not aggressive or anything like that. So that's another big one. If that's anything, I know it's not easy. It's not an easy journey to figure that one out. But if that guides you, it can help a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's even so important in general, just for anyone who's finding things difficult, really. Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely, and I think even for you as young people sort of kind of stepping out into the world now as young adults, you know, you've got to make choices about where you're going to study, what you want to do with your lives. And a lot of people are going to try and tell you what to do. It's kind of just what adults seem to like to do for young people. And then sometimes it's really important. We do need that guidance. And I say that I'm an adult, but, you know, I appreciated guidance when I was a young person, because sometimes I didn't know. But then I also think that if I loved myself more and I felt more comfortable inside, some of my choices would have been different. I would have probably taken a different path. And so I think that's really important, is that, getting inside really good, getting that dialogue really good, because it will serve to lead you no matter where you go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all your wonderful answers and for talking about this with us today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And I know we had a lot of other questions, I think, that we didn't get to today. And so I think I'm going to answer those. I said to you that I'll do it on Facebook or on Instagram at Footsteps to Inspire, and we'll find a time to do a live and even, you know, answer other questions that come up. So this may not be the only time we answer questions if anyone has questions that haven't had answers to yet. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.